This video proudly brought to you by the fine people at Handmade Industrial. Whether you're new to knife making or a seasoned pro, visit handmade.us to up your game with affordable quality gear. What's going on, fine people of YouTube? Thanks for hanging with me for another episode. Hopefully those few clips that you just saw caught you up to speed on what we're doing. Last week we got that blade forged out, and in today's episode we're going to be finishing the Kukri. To start this off, now that I've got it quenched and hardened, how are we going to clean it up? We're going to clean it up with some 30% vinegar! Highly concentrate, Harris since 1922. This ain't your mama's cooking vinegar, this is your grandpappy's nose hair trimming vinegar. So, let's go ahead and throw our magic potion into a container and we'll remove the forge scale and our nose hairs all in one go.
Oh, Jesus, what's that smell, man?
Alright, so now that we've let this hang out in the vinegar for about 48 hours, when it comes out of the vinegar, you'll notice that it does etch the metal, and specifically kind of where I did the bevels, where it's a little bit smoother, cleaner metal, at least thinning them out some, it leaves kind of that darker look to it. I really think that for this particular knife, instead of trying to grind in more bevels and get clean metal appearance, I think that would look good, but I think that I'll keep it more like this and just have a sharpened edge. And we may try to clean up the spine and do a shiny spine. I don't really know just yet, but just at least wanted to share kind of what it looks like coming out of the vinegar. You'll notice that it does have a lot of etching from the vinegar. So typically what I like to do is water it off, get the vinegar off of there, and then if you leave it, it will start to rust. So I like to get it really dry and then quickly apply some sort of an oil, whether that's mineral oil, beeswax, WD-40, whatever your choice is. I recommend throwing it on, or else it will start to kind of rust. So we're going to do that real quick, and then we're going to move on to picking out the handle material and getting that situated. Let's do it. So now that we have this bad boy oiled up, it's got that really rough forged look that I like, and I think it's going to be a pretty good finish. For the handle, I want to try some pieces of wood. This is the very first batch of wood that I had tried to stabilize and dye. And once we get them cut open and oiled up, you can see that for the most part, they look okay. This is in green and yellow, and there's not a ton of color that got down into the center, a little bit, but not much. I definitely want to try one piece from my first stabilizing batch. I'll probably end up using this block just because it's a little bigger, and we'll see if, you know, the center has some color in it. First couple of batches I did, I only let them soak for 12 hours, then put them under vacuum in the second color for about 12 hours, and I really don't think that's enough time. So my new process involves letting them soak for 24 hours, and then on the second color, when we run an actual vacuum, I do that for 1 to 2 days. And I think it has more chance of getting deeper into the core. So we'll just go with it. We'll cut this dude in half and see what it looks like. And if it looks good, we'll go ahead and use this piece on the Kukri. I don't have a great way to cut these in my lawnmower shed. I have the bandsaw, but that is really difficult to get a good straight line. So what I did was took some of these pieces to work and used the table saw to get a little bit more accurate cuts. I accidentally left this one this morning, so I wasn't able to cut it, but we do have some other pieces to try out. So let's look at these first two here. This is what the outside of this piece looked like. Definitely some burl here and then some straight grain stuff. And that could potentially be really cool. When I cut it on the table saw, the friction just smoked them out. So we'll have to clean that up to kind of see what those end up looking like. Hopefully it'll be cool. So these are a contender. Then we have a whole different piece of wood. I believe this is maple. And it's just kind of some regular maple. So we cut those up. They didn't burn as bad. And you can see the color got into them pretty good. And you can see the different colors where I dunked them in stain and they soaked up some. And then I did the full vacuum in red. So that's kind of interesting. There's not a ton of like crazy grain going on in these though. So they're really just kind of, you know, the color is what's cool about them. So this could potentially be an option, I suppose. And then lastly, we've got this piece, which same thing happened to it. I went to cut it in half and this one burned really bad. However, once I got the other one cleaned up, you can see we got a lot of really cool stuff going on in this piece. And I'm kind of leaning towards using this one. We've got the majority of this bottom is burl, and there's all kinds of cool, crazy grain that goes on. And then the end was less burl and more oak, and it absorbed way more color. You can still see some of the red kind of creeping up in some of this stuff. So I think that this would be a really cool piece to use on the Kukri. It's definitely big enough and should cover the whole span of the handle. In fact, you can see here, there's plenty to work with. So I think we'll probably try to do this. I'm going to go ahead and clean up this other piece, flatten them out, and then we'll get them traced out. And yeah, I like this. I think we'll go with this piece and see what it looks like when we get it wrapped up. This is only an 80 grit finish, so I'm sure it will be a little bit nicer looking once we get it sanded down, but that's definitely a really cool piece. And to be quite honest, this particular chunk of wood I found for free. So like I was mentioning in some of my other videos, you really just have to be on the lookout as a knife maker, because you can find pieces of wood that are super interesting that don't cost any money. And to be able to find something like this, throw it in a vacuum chamber and put some cactus juice and dye in it, to me, it's just really cool. You know, you pretty much make the knife and the handle all from stuff that you found and transformed. And to me, that just makes the whole thing much cooler. All right, now that we've taken the time to flatten these out, we've got them looking pretty decent and flat. And for this, we're going to be using some red liners, which will hopefully bring out the little bit of red that's in this thing. And then the other thing, and more importantly, I should say, is the fact that this tang is tapered. And this is something new for me. I don't really mess with a whole lot of tapered tangs. And what I mean by that is just the fact that part of the handle scale is going to be up here towards the front where it's thick. And then you can see that as it goes back to the end, it tapers down to a much thinner, stock. So when doing this, you want to be sure that you're nice and flat all the way back. Because if you're not, and you go to glue up something that's hard and straight, you might have, that might be exaggerated, but you see what I'm saying? You might have gaps in between where it needs to be. So this is something to pay attention to if you're trying this, and you can see just by placing it up here and pinching it close that for the most part it's laying relatively flat. And so that's something that I'm trying to pay attention to here, because I think it will make a big difference in the overall appearance when we go to glue this up if the liners are touching all the way around. Now, if you have a little bit of a gap, you know, to me, it's not the end of the world. To some people who are trying to make perfect knives, maybe it is important. But, you know, for our purposes and for this knife and being the first tapered tang, I think I've got it ground down enough and in the right spots for it to be good. So anyway, let's go ahead. We're going to glue these up real fast, and then we'll be able to move on to putting the tang on there, tracing it out, cutting it away, and kind of preparing them for the glue up. So now that we've taken the time to grind the material back to the tang of the knife, we are ready to move on to pretty much thinning this side out. I cut it on a table saw. This piece is a little bit thicker, so we're going to have to thin this down to match the other side. But you can kind of get an idea of what the tapered tang looks like. It's definitely cool, and really like it. Now, before we get into thinning this side out and getting both sets of wood to be uniform and the same thickness throughout the knife, I wanted to take a second and talk about knife handles in general and shaping. This is a chopper, and on a knife that you're making that is designed to be swinging hard and chopping, you're gonna want to shape it in such a way that your hand isn't gonna wanna fall off. Now, the way that this is designed, it has a nice swoop on the end, which will naturally kind of give you a stop there. But I brought out a couple other examples here just to kind of, you know, maybe help some newer knife makers. So this is another knife that I made out of another farrier's rasp, and it has a pretty good chopping style handle on it. So you can see that it's got the rounded portion here for your palm, and that just fits right in your palm. And then it also has kind of a swoop on the end, but it also has a very thick section, like a bell end almost back here. And that's really meant so that it stays in your hand. As you're swinging down and you're hitting a piece of wood, you know, your hand's gonna kind of want to fall back a little bit, and that's why that's shaped the way that it is. So it's something to think about when you're making a knife and you're putting and shaping a handle on it. What kind of knife is it going to be? Is it going to be a chopper? Is it going to be a kitchen knife? You know, you need to put the right type of handle design on whatever type of knife you're making. Another example would be this dagger file that I made, and you can tell it is not really meant for chopping necessarily. It does have some good retention. As you hold it here, it kind of gets thicker so that your hand gets seated here. You definitely wouldn't want to hold it back here as it kind of tapers, you know, further out. So that would be maybe another example of a different type of knife. And then another chopping style design without the bell end would be something like this, where when you look at the cross section this way, it doesn't really have that really enlarged thing this way. It does, however, have kind of an area here that helps to hold on, and it keeps the knife from coming out this way with this little finger choil area. And then it's also got kind of a shape where it's going to be kind of narrow on the bottom and thicker on the top, and that's just to get a better grip down here at the bottom of your hand. It kind of fits this little, you know, swell in your hand. So this would be another, I feel like, a pretty good design for a swinging knife or chopping knife if you didn't want to have, you know, an extreme bell end to it. Anyway, I just wanted to share that. Hopefully that helps some people. If you're making a knife that's intended to be swung really hard or cutting down trees or something, you're going to want to design it in such a way that it stays in your hand. So I think for this particular knife, we'll probably try a little bit of a combination between these two, maybe the sword and this other one with the bell end, and that way we'll get the ultimate handle on here that will just glue to the inside of your hand. So to do that, I'll walk through some of the steps that I do in case you're interested in creating that type of a handle. First, before we start shaping, like I said, we're going to thin this side out just a little bit more. The ultimate way to do this is to start fresh with two sides that match each other. And you can see this side is definitely thicker, so we're going to thin this down and make sure that it matches this side before we start. Let's do that. All right, so now that we've taken the time, they're relatively even. We are now ready to begin shaping this thing. And there's multiple ways to do this. You can just start going at it and freehand it. But if you're newer to shaping out handles, I recommend using a pencil and just kind of putting some grind to lines as to where you want to grind a certain bevel. Now, I try to think of grinding out knife handles as different steps or different parts to it so that it doesn't get overwhelming. And in general, we want to have a thicker section in the middle on both these different cross sections. So not only this way, but also this way. And then typically having something that tapers up towards the front smaller, getting wider towards the middle, and then doing the same thing back here. And then because this is a chopper, we're still going to have a bit of a swell on the end. So to start this out, I'm simply just going to be taking a pencil, using my finger as a guide along the side of this, and moving the pencil in to about where I want to start grinding, and just kind of scribing a line here. And you can see that for the most part, you can get that pencil line to be pretty straight. And that's, I would say, about an 1/8 inch. And really, that's just going to help me stay symmetrical on both sides when we're doing this. So it doesn't really matter where you start, in my opinion, whether it's the top or the bottom. And I guess depending upon what type of knife you're doing would depend on what kind of a grind you're putting into it. But for the most part, starting on the top is all right. So now that we kind of have a few lines to go off of, and they're both looking pretty symmetrical, we're going to take our handle up to a horizontal platen here, and we're just going to kind of 45 that edge in and remove the corner of this material. So you can see with just one simple pass there, we've knocked off the corner and our line is nice and straight for the most part. Maybe there's a little dip back here, but it's a good way to control taking off the same amount on both sides is really what I'm trying to get at. So let's go ahead and do the same thing to the other side. So there we go. With just one more pass, we have pretty much the exact same amount removed off of both sides. Now this is mainly just a demonstration as to show you a technique, and you know, theoretically for this we're going to have to grind a lot more, but it's a good starting point and it takes the corners away from the handle, and just doing that already makes it feel 100 times better. So we're just going to continue that ideology throughout the handle of marking out where we're going to be taking material. And then once we get the majority of the corners knocked off and it has kind of a, you know, rounded cross section this way, we can then begin smoothing out these hard lines and turning the hard corners into smooth, you know, transitions. So already, just with this little tiny bit of material removed, you can put your hand on this and it feels like it just belongs. Obviously we have more to do, but you know, that's kind of the idea behind this method of tracing it out and kind of taking a little bit at a time. Probably now go back over this line again at a little bit steeper angle so that we can start thinning the bottom out a little bit. All right, so we've made it to the end of the build. And now that we have a good, wicked sharp edge on this thing, we're able to test it out a little bit and see if it will cut. I am really excited to see if it will hold up to the abuse I'm about to put it through. I do quite a bit of testing on my knives, but nothing extreme. I would like to try some extreme testing with this blade to see how it holds up. And to start it off, we're going to cut a little bit of paper, then we're going to cut a paper towel roll, and you say, wow, that's super extreme. Well, no, it's not. But we're going to show you that it cuts paper and paper towel rolls to show you just how sharp it is. And then we're going to chop through some wood, potentially some other materials, use and abuse this thing, and then we'll try to cut some more paper when we're done to see how the edge holds up. Why not? This is meant to be a thrasher, a chopper, and a destroyer of material. So, without further ado, let's destroy some material. Classic paper test. All right, so after a good series of different types of tests, we now have drawn our conclusions on this thing. It held up really, really well. I am pleasantly surprised at just how much this thing was able to cut. I've been cutting with it for the last 2 to 3 days. I went out in the woods and cut a ton of brush and fallen logs and trees, and it did really, really well. It's a super easy swinging blade and one that is definitely meant for some brush clearing. That part went really well and it held up great. I chopped through multiple trees and logs. I just showed you guys a little bit of the footage that I gathered because we're already getting pretty long in the video. But for the amount of stuff that I cut through, this thing held up wonderfully. Now, on the clip towards the end with the nail, it did not cut the nail. It did bend the nail. And I really didn't expect it to cut the nail just because this edge is so stinking thin to begin with. And knives can cut nails if the knife is the right type of knife and the right type of geometry on the edge. This one is not. This one is more of a thin, slicey, deep cutting blade. It's not a robust secondary bevel, so that did not surprise me. And it did get a couple of little chips here and here from the nail, and that's kind of to be expected, I guess. The other little area that took some damage was from that terracotta mushroom or the clay mushroom, and you can see that, you know, it kind of, I don't know if it's a chip or a roll, it's just a little kind of a deformation in the edge. And I've never tried to cut a clay mushroom before with a knife, so I wasn't sure exactly how that would go. But now we know. And I would say for the most part, this thing held up pretty stinking good. I have not touched the edge since I first put it on, and we'll see if it can still, at least some of it, cut through paper. Pretty stinking good. We'll try to get up here where the little chips are, and you can tell it kind of drags there on that little chip, and that's to be expected. But the rest of the edge held up really well, and this is certainly a knife that I'll be holding on to and using in the future. Really hope you guys enjoyed the video. Thanks so much for hanging out with me. Hope you guys have a fantastic weekend, and we'll catch you again here soon.